heavier than heaven, he found something that was very powerful. It was the narcotic of attention, which in some ways was actually more powerful to Kurt Cobain than drugs themselves. He loved being the center of attention, and you know, that from then on, he was sold.
You know, the beginning of Nirvana was a shaky ordeal for everybody involved. And like I said before, you know, if you look at, as the analogy of the great plane taking off, that what it would turn into, it didn't even look like it was going to get off the ground there at first.
In April 1987, Kurt finally left Aberdeen to live with his first girlfriend, Tracy Miranda, in the lively college town of Olympia.
Well, I think Kurt had to leave Aberdeen at some point, and Olympia was kind of a compromise. Seattle, he thought, was too big and scary. He went and looked at an apartment in Tacoma and then was afraid he was going to get shot. He decided to move to Olympia. It was the closest arty community. Olympia had a college. It had an active music scene, but even when we use the word scene, we're probably overstating it. There were a handful of punk rock shows every other week. There were a couple of clubs. Cobain wasn't old enough to go to those clubs. There was one all-ages club that happened around that time that did give him a forum to play. So there were things happening, and Olympia became his home. It was probably the place he loved more than any place else, certainly artistically. What was most important about Olympia is he got exposed to a number of intellectuals. There were a lot of people who were going to Evergreen, the college there, who were very bright, and they became Kurt's friends, or if not his friends, they became people he got exposed to. From Slim Moon to you know, Calvin Johnson to Toby Vale to Kathleen Hanna. There were a number of people in that world that were, you know, extremely bright people, and they encouraged Kurt, I think, to, you know, up the level of what he was doing.
I had these two good friends. Well, actually, Dylan Carlson and I had these two good friends, Tam Ormond and Tracy Miranda, and I had known Tracy for quite a while because she was part of our group who went to a lot of Melvin shows. And Tam and Tracy were really the first people from Olympia who decided that Kurt was something special. And they started driving to Aberdeen whenever they had time off work, because both of them had decided that he was going to be their next boyfriend. And they were basically in cahoots, working as a pair, but one of them was going to get him.
Some friends of mine and I got to Aberdeen and hang out with the Melvins, and got to, like, Buzz was still living with his parents, but we go to his house and hang out sometimes, or go to some parties. And then eventually Kurt and Matt Lukin and I can't remember who else, they shared a house together. And then Matt moved out, and Kurt was just living there, ended up living there by himself, but Nirvana used to practice there and play there, and there'd always be parties there and whatnot. And then eventually he got kicked out, or was getting evicted because he wasn't paying the rent. At some point during that 6-month period, Kurt and I started dating, and dated for like several months before he was getting evicted from his house. Then he decided to move to Olympia with me. I think part of the reason Kurt liked Olympia was that there's a lot of different styles meshing at the same time, a lot of music going on. It was certainly more low-key than Seattle as far as going to shows. People didn't, you know, dress up as much or put on as much makeup or wear the so-called right clothes to go to shows. But there's a lot of do-it-yourself attitude. You know, K Records was going along pretty good at the time, and people were more willing to put on their own shows, make their own flyers, just do a lot of the work by themselves. And there's just a lot of different types of music playing in Olympia at that time.
Well, Kurt moved to Olympia when he was 19, and the most important person in that milieu was Tracy Miranda. He hooked up with, finally, his first real girlfriend, and a woman who really played a major role in sort of keeping it together for him. She was both his girlfriend and somewhat of a mother figure at times to him. I mean, she paid his bills. She fed him. She cleaned their house. And she also, which I don't think she gets much credit for, she's quite a bright and very well-rounded person. She was very interested in music. And in fact, when she and Cobain first met, her background in music and her awareness of records was far greater than his. So I think she almost played a role of a Svengali in terms of making him aware of, hey, Kurt, listen to this, open your parameters up. And she was very into punk rock, went to a lot of shows, and then additionally, she was very popular. People really liked Tracy. And so she became kind of the better half of the couple. And, you know, consequently, a number of people who I talked to who went and saw those early shows when Nirvana was called Bliss, they went only because they knew Tracy. They said it's Tracy's boyfriend's band is what Nirvana was first known as. And so Tracy played a huge role in the early history of this band and ultimately, I think, in their success.
Well, I tried to be very supportive. It was hard at times because for the first 6 months or so we lived together, he did have a job and worked and contributed to the income and cleaning the house. And then eventually he couldn't really pay the rent except for when they got money from shows, but a lot of the money they got at that time went back into band equipment because he didn't have, you know, a lot of money. They didn't get paid very much. And then he stopped cleaning, and that was kind of a contention. We'd fight quite a bit over that because I was working 50 or 60 hours a week, earning just a little over minimum wage, you know, to support us and everything. But other than that, you know, I try to be real supportive of him and help him out because his music was real important to him, and I really, you know, I liked Nirvana a lot, and I wanted them to be successful.
Kurt's art began to blossom with Tracy's support. He would spend hours painting at their house in Olympia, and the band practiced with increasing frequency. Kurt's style and songwriting developed considerably, aided by the influence of the Olympia art scene.
He would like to go to parties, but he'd be really shy. He was really a pretty shy guy, and he'd occasionally be the wildest, weirdest guy at the party and do something totally bizarre. But most of the time, he'd actually just be in a corner somewhere, quietly watching everything and occasionally making a wry comment. But you never knew when he was going to suddenly just do something absolutely hilarious. And it was never drunken.
Kurt was shy to a certain extent. Like I think he had to push himself to go and actually introduce himself to people or act not shy, but he could pull it off really well. Like he could be shy and nervous but not show it when he was dealing with people. And I think he just had a hard time in general dealing with people that were more normal. Like he had a really hard time with rednecks. When he worked as a janitor for a while, he had to work with a couple of rednecks at night, and they'd make jokes about women or the minorities, and he just had a hard time not saying anything in response, but also not going along with it either. And I think that was hard for him in dealing with people sometimes. I guess the relationship was like anyone else's. It had its ups, its downs. You know, we fought sometimes, but we also got along really well together and had a lot of fun. He liked, because before he liked to cook around the house. He loved to hang out with the cats and the pet rats and the birds, and just not just to look at, but just to, you know, pet as well and feed. We never really went camping, but he did like to go out in the woods and nature and go for walks and be outside. You know, he liked the fact we had a little backyard he could hang out in.
Well, one thing about Kurt is that he was definitely obsessed with music. I mean, like us all, like the group of friends that we hung out with, obsession with music was the thing that we had in common. And he was always buying new records, going out to see new bands, talking about, you know,